Greetings, fair listeners, and welcome back to another episode of The Tale Collector, celebrating stories and storytelling in all their forms, and the bards and artists who bring them all to life. I'm your host, Erica Adams. If there's one thing I've learned about living in Duluth, it's that praying for cold weather to warm up can sometimes be like praying for water to stop being wet. Even up until as late as April, we still get some sporadic snowfalls and harsh wind chills from time to time. But of course, nature does what it will, whether we humans like it or not. Yet this can also be a beautiful thing. There is a power and mystery about nature that even to this day, with all our knowledge and expertise, seldom fails to amaze and inspire. And who better to guide us through such a world than the children of nature herself? Fairies. Even better, fairies not simply drawn or painted on the page, but displayed before tangible backdrops in all of their three-dimensional glory. And so, with gorgeously magical settings, vivid descriptions of the natural world, and characters reminiscent of the incomparable Jim Henson's Creature Shop, famed sculptor Wendy Froud and fantasy writer Terri Windling have teamed up to present these literary gems, the Old Oakwood series, comprised of A Midsummer Night's Fairy Tale, The Winter Child, and The Fairies of Spring Cottage, published between 1999 and 2001, and recommended for readers 9 and up. The series' protagonist, Sneezelwort Roodmuster Rowanberry Boggs VII, or simply Sneezel for short, is a gentle-hearted, 200-year-old tree-root fairy child whose home is Old Oakwood, the oldest and most esteemed fairy court in the wooded hills of Dartmoor, located within the British Isles. He has long pointed ears, a fur pelt, a somewhat pudgy face, and a tufted tail of which he is very proud. He lives at the root of a large tree, and he enjoys almost nothing so much as a warm fire and a hot meal, especially when that meal involves cakes. In the first book, A Midsummer Night's Fairy Tale, the fairy court is abuzz with preparations for Midsummer Night, during which the gathering of the fairy queen Titania takes place. For the entire 200 years of his life, poor Sneezel has never managed to stay awake long enough to see just what happens at the gathering. This time, though, he is determined to learn the answer, and to help out and hopefully secure for himself a significant role in the process. But then he learns that Queen Titania is under a spell of deep sleep, and he must obtain her midsummer crown in order to solve this mystery before something terrible happens at the gathering. In the second book, The Winter Child, the fairies of Old Oakwood are once again very busy and excited, this time for Midwinter's Eve. The problem? Winter is nowhere to be found. Without the power of Lady Winter, dangerous creatures like the goblins, normally asleep during the cold snowy months, threaten to gather together and wreak havoc upon Old Oakwood. With the help of his best friend Twig, some friendly sorcerers, some elusive elementals, and a mysterious downy-haired fairy baby hatched from a golden egg, Sneezel sets out to find Lady Winter and restore the cycle of the seasons. Finally, in The Fairies of Spring Cottage, after narrowly escaping from a band of strange and aggressive stick-like creatures, Sneezel inadvertently winds up in the worst place possible for a small fairy like himself, in a house filled with humans. Sneezel must enlist the aid of a cheerful brownie that also lives inside the house, as well as some royal rat fairies, dolls that are able to come to life through fairy magic, and even a young human girl, in order to find his way home. As I touched on before, one thing that truly makes these books stand out is their pictures, which are actually photographs. The characters are shown as dolls and puppets on real-life sets, both natural and man-made. Wife of world-famous fantasy artist Brian Froud, of whose work I am a huge fan. Wendy Froud is a doll maker and an extraordinary artist in her own right. One of her greatest achievements was her help in the creation of the character Yoda from the film Star Wars Episode V, The Empire Strikes Back. Like her husband, Froud has also worked with Muppet creator Jim Henson, designing various creatures for The Muppet Show, as well as his classic films, The Muppet Movie, Labyrinth, and The Dark Crystal. The story's other half, writer Terri Windling, is one of fantasy's finest authors for both children and adults, and her works have won numerous awards, such as the World Fantasy Award and the Bram Stoker Award, among others. One of her primary interests as a writer is exploring how myth and folklore are used and expressed in today's art. Here, the way she describes Old Oakwood, one could almost believe that magical beings really do live just beyond the trees, the rivers, or the hills, and could be seen with just the right mindset, as seen in the first book, pages 4 through 6. Fairies are contrary creatures, but there is one way they are pleased to oblige us. To humans determined not to believe in them, they remain quite invisible, yet anyone who has ever suspected that nature herself has a spirit and soul can learn to see her children, the fairies, flickering through shadows of field and wood. Old Oakwood was quiet and still if you looked at it through human eyes, but Sneasel looked through fairy eyes and saw quite a different picture. The shadows were filled with woodland folk, fairies and foxes, brownies and badgers, piskies and porcupines, derricks and deer, all busy now with preparations for the gathering to come. Tiny green piskies harvested cobwebs, red-eared trolls gathered mandrake roots, and luminous flower fairies wove garlands of ivy and briar roses. Brownies with clothes of bark and moss painted white spots onto red mushrooms. Excited rabbits, always a nuisance, rolled in the leaves and scampered underfoot. Delicate sylphs flew overhead, pouring mist from silver buckets. Windling writes like a grandparent or older storyteller reciting a tale for children. Her words are so carefully chosen as if by a wise adult with strong knowledge of this magical world, yet they are simple enough so that children can be completely immersed in the tale. And speaking of children, Sneasel is a character that I believe many, both kids and kids at heart, could relate to. Little Sneasel is seldom taken seriously in spite of his good intentions. He is ungainly, somewhat gullible, and not especially strong or handsome. Thus he seeks reassurance that he indeed has a purpose in his life, as his wise uncle tells him on page 18. Starbucket filled his pipe with fairy herbs, then sat back in his chair. "Tell me, nephew, what brings you all the way to this part of the wood?" Sneasel, seated at his feet, looked up at the kind old troll gravely. "What happens on Midsummer Night?" "Wait and see at the gathering," the troll replied, eyes sparkling. "You'll go this year, won't you?" "Yes, but... Uncle Starbucket, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Everyone keeps shooing me away. I want a job like everyone else, and I don't know what mine is." The old troll puffed on his pipe, considering. "All creatures must follow their natures, boy. You must do what you were born to do best." "But I'm not good at anything. I'm clumsy and get everything wrong. I mess things up," Sneasel confided, "and everyone laughs at me." "Well then, Sneasel, maybe that's your role. Maybe you're supposed to cause chaos and stir things up and make people laugh. Why, that's a fine job to have," the old troll assured him. "No, it's not," the little fairy mumbled, ears drooping around his cheeks. "Remember, the actions of the smallest fairy help or harm all of Old Oakwood. Have patience, boy. Wisdom is a thing you earn, not a thing you're born with." Sneasel's ears pricked up at this. "How do I earn wisdom, Uncle?" "There's no recipe for wisdom, boy. Just trust your heart, for the truth of things isn't always clear to the eyes or ears. The world is filled with illusion, child. Not everything is as it seems, but the heart is where true wisdom lies, and you have a good one, Sneasel." Sneasel frowned, scratching his pelt. Adults always talked in riddles like this. He hoped that in another 100 years he would finally understand them. As is often true, what children may lack in physical strength and worldly knowledge, they can and do make up for with an open heart and an unbiased point of view. Sneasel always gives help to any creature, fairy or otherwise, that needs it. And more often than not, those creatures turn out to be powerful beings who in turn offer rewards for his kind acts. In this way, Sneasel is able to see that he does have the power to change things for the better, just by being himself. On page 50 of the first book. "I may be a hero, but I'm still a fool," the downcast little fairy groaned. "I still mess everything up. I'm still the same old Sneasel." "And that's a fine thing to be," said a voice behind him. The child turned and saw a radiant man and woman among the trees, dressed in grass-green velvet, crowned with ivy and rowan berries, luminous with the morning light. He knew at once who they must be. "Are you?" "The Lord and Lady of the Wood," the lovely woman said. "And you, my little trickster, are Sneezelwort Roodmuster Rowanberry Boggs the Seventh, a proud old name for a fine young fairy. We've come to return a wish to you. Take it with our blessing, child." "I will," promised Sneezel earnestly. "I'll be much wiser from now on." "Just be Sneezel. That's good enough," said the raven-haired Lord of the Wood with a smile. It is apparent that the two minds behind this literary adventure have created these characters with great skill and, more importantly, with great love. Every creature's appearance and personality is unique and expressive. Bright, rosy-cheeked children, wizened, starry-eyed elders, and grotesque, cunning monsters, with the tone and object placement within each picture fitting perfectly with its corresponding occurrence. Though they specialize in differing forms of art, Froud and Windling's abilities are such that they add an authenticity to these stories that, to me, is pretty rare in many newer children's books today. The combination of photographed sculptures and rich narration reveal a new world that can be believable and wondrous to children and adults alike. Gather round next time for another tale you may have forgotten or have never heard before. Until then, listeners, may inspiration always find you.